Thank you. It's really great to be here, and I'm only sorry I wasn't able to be at more of the conference, but I've had canceled flights and other sorts of things, and it's kind of amazing I'm here at all, so I'm grateful for that. I just wanted to say a few things about how I see the relationship of climate change to social justice. And just to note, you know, watching the news over the last week, we've got a lineup of hurricanes in the Gulf, each of which seems bigger than the last one, which itself was the biggest one since whatever. We've had heat waves in the Bay Area that are completely unprecedented. We've got forest fires raging up and down the West Coast. I mean, how many people here either have had to evacuate or know someone who's had to evacuate their home? I know probably at least 5 different people around the country who, from fire or from the hurricane or from flooding, are at risk of losing their homes. Climate change is upon us. It's no longer theoretical. And because of that, I think this is a really crucial moment to be having this conference and a really crucial moment to be organizing around climate change. So I want to say a few things about how I see we can organize and then talk a bit about some of the things I have been doing. I think when we talk about climate change, we need to always be clear that climate change is a social justice issue. It's not about polar bears. I mean, it is about polar bears, but it's not just about polar bears. It is about people and about the gross inequalities in our system of economy and our system of racism and the other divisions that plague our society. You know, the states in the United States that are most at risk of hurricanes are the states with the largest black populations. The people around the globe who are most impacted by climate change and most at risk are people in the third world, people of color globally. Climate change is also an issue of indigenous rights and sovereignty because the things that we are doing that exacerbate climate change are, so many of them are being done on indigenous lands. So I think we need to always be clear that this is an issue of social justice and it can't be solved just by, you know, it's not going to be solved just by massive investment in some new technological thing Silicon Valley comes up with to make rich people even richer. It's going to be solved by changing our systems in deep, deep ways that also have to address the inequalities that we're facing. Yeah. Along with the crisis of climate change, we have this tremendous crisis of the concentration of wealth and power in fewer and fewer hands and the extreme violence that they're willing to go to in order to maintain that wealth and power. And that is the same crisis because those are the same forces that are preventing us from doing what we need to do around climate change. I also think we need to look at climate change and think about framing it as something even a little bit broader. I like to think of it as massive ecological destruction on a global scale. Because if we look at it that way, then we can get out of these like really fruitless and pointless arguments about is climate change real, is climate, you know, is the hurricane fake news? It's like, you know, nobody with their eyes open can deny that we are doing massive ecosystem destruction on a global scale. And the counter to that has to be massive ecosystem regeneration on a global scale. And that includes social, political, economic regeneration. And the good news You know, the happy part of that is that we actually know how to do that. And I think you've heard this weekend many, many, many ways of approaching that. And the key is soil, not oil. Rebuilding, regenerating our soil, repairing our water cycles, doing all of the regenerative things that people have been talking about this weekend and so many more. If we actually made a global commitment to shift and to do these things, I don't know if we at this point can reverse climate change, but we sure as hell could mitigate it. And we, you know, the earth has tremendous resilience and regenerative capacities. And I actually believe that if we make the shift and say, hey, you know, our top priority right now is going to be not just repairing the damage, but rebuilding and recreating systems that can actually regenerate and heal, then I believe the earth works with us. And we have some tremendous allies, allies in things that are lowly and humble, like earthworms and bacteria and algae in the ocean and fungi. All these things are actually amazingly powerful earth healers that can work with us to regenerate and restabilize the Earth's climates and ecosystems in a new way. So isn't that an exciting project? Yeah. I think we spend far too much time telling people how bad things are. It's as if, you know, we're constantly telling people the story of that you could boil it down to things are worse than you thought, and it's your fault. That's not really a great mobilizing, you know, inspiring message. And in some ways, it's no wonder people turn off and go into denial and apathy or into believing all kinds of strangely unbelievable things that people are happy to believe these days. I think we need to be telling people, this is the great, exciting moment of our time. This is the moment we all came in here for. Into this lifetime. This is the moment where we have the great opportunity to make an enormous transformation. And what an exciting project to be involved in. To do that, I think we need also, deep underneath it all, a shift in consciousness. A shift away from seeing the earth as separate, isolated objects, as a giant mechanism that's all set in order by some divine hand and then kind of functions on its own. We need to go back to that indigenous understanding that the earth is a web of relationships. And I think that worldview is something, again, indigenous people have always held that. And you know, I don't want to lump all indigenous traditions together because there are thousands and thousands of them around the world that are all different and very diverse. But I think there is a common thread in understanding that goes to the core of human life on this planet up until the last few hundred years or so, that really understood that everything is in relationship. And that is true at the roots of European culture as well as many of the other cultures that we think of today as indigenous. In European culture, that worldview got severed very strongly because it was associated constantly throughout the medieval times and the beginnings of modern capitalism with peasant rebellions and with uprisings and with resistance to this order by which some people controlled others. In particular, it was the witch persecutions in Europe that created a legacy of fear around any of these ideas of the universe being alive and animate and dynamic, and I think we still suffer from their results today. So I think that work of reconnecting, of developing an understanding of this web of relations is something that we can all do, and it is core to addressing the issues of climate change. Great. So I'll just say a little about my own work. I started off as a witch. And still am. In fact, we're going to be doing our big witchy Halloween ritual on October 28th right here in this space this year, right in the convention center. If you want a chance to experience a bit of those ancient indigenous European, Middle Eastern sort of eclectic roots. And the reason that I came to that understanding, originally it was kind of realizing that in the religion I was born in Judaism and the other patriarchal religions, I didn't see a lot that honored me as a woman. And as I got deeper into it, I also began to feel like what was important in those old pre-Christian traditions that go back before Christianity, which is really what even modern day witchcraft draws its roots from. It was, again, this understanding that nature is sacred and that we live in relationship with everything in the natural world. I have always been an activist in many different ways, but around 20 years ago, I also started studying and teaching permaculture because I saw it as the practical aspect of believing the earth is sacred. Permaculture is the kind of how-to part, putting that into practice. And so some of my work around climate change has been organizing in the permaculture community, trying to find ways, because I think in the permaculture community and in places like this, we have solutions. We have this understanding that if we shift to this kind of holistic worldview and start working together with nature, again, we have the tools to restore and regenerate ecosystems, and when we put them into practice, they often can make those changes much more quickly than we even imagine that they might, and much more extensively. So how do we get those solutions talked about? Because if we don't, then the solutions that are going to be put into practice are a waste of billions of dollars and things on things like machines to suck carbon out of the atmosphere and then do something with it. I actually heard some guy from Silicon Valley talking about this great, we've got a machine now that can suck carbon out of the atmosphere. I'm like, yeah, we've had one for 500 million years or so. It's called plants. Yeah, right. And I also teach a program called Earth Activist Training that puts together permaculture with spirituality and activism, and teaches a permaculture design course with its roots in spirit and its focus on how do we actually organize around this. As part of that, we've also been offering diversity scholarships for people of color for about the last 4 or 5 years, which I think has made a difference in really opening up opportunities for a lot of really amazing, incredible people here in the Bay Area and around the country. So I also travel and teach a lot, and I'll just say that in the last month or so, I've just come back from teaching in Europe I was in an area in Germany, in southern Germany, called the Allgäu, which is a very beautiful area on the foothills of the Alps. And one of the wonderful things there is like every farmhouse has solar panels on it. You know, Germany has really gone in for solar, rooftop solar, and the difference is amazing. You know, where you see these beautiful old houses that look like Swiss chalets, and they all have solar panels on them. And we could be doing that because not very many people go take vacations in sunny Germany. It's not where you think of for, like, you know, getting your tan. Germany tends to be gray and cloudy, and yet they're producing anywhere from 30 to 50% of their energy with solar panels and renewables. Denmark, I think, is close to 100%, and there are many countries that are already on track to that 100% mark. So we could be doing that too, and we need to organize and to make that happen. I also was in an area, a wonderful area in France called La Zade, or Notre-Dame-des-Landes. It's near Nantes, and close to Brittany. And it's an area where they've been trying to build an airport for about 9 years against tremendous resistance, where the activists have actually gotten together with the local people, the traditional farmers whose families have been there forever. And this 10,000 acres of land is kind of like a true autonomous zone. You go in there, the police don't go in there very much, and there are farms that were abandoned because they were going to be, you know, destroyed for the airport, that people have now taken over and begun farming again. And there are collectives that have started up doing permaculture, and there are people who've gone in as an act of resistance and done things like building a beautiful traditional timber frame barn. And they have gatherings and wonderful actions and encampments and teaching and learning. And it was an amazing experience to just be there in an area. It was kind of like a glimpse of what the world might be if we really shifted to a different way of being, where everything is produced and given away for free, where people can come and live and squat the land or work the land if they want to, and where there was this just tremendous spirit of both resisting because of climate change, you know, this destruction of the land, but also doing it in a way that kind of brings alive a kind of vision of what the world could be. So I'm going to stop, but just to say, I think that we can do that when we organize around climate change. Again, we need to be organizing around climate change as a social justice issue. And we need to do it in a way that embodies that understanding of relationship and of our deep and spiritual and healing connection to the natural world, and brings that alive and allows people to see that and feel that and experience that. And then I think we can organize by inviting people into the great, exciting project of our times. And if we do that, I think we have enormous hope for making a tremendous transformation.
Thank you. She just came from Europe, so I think it's, what time is now for you?
I got up at 4 in the morning.
So this is a speech at 4 in the morning for her, so it's great. Our next speaker is, I met her years ago in Seattle, and I was inviting her to be the keynote speaker of a conference that we organized before called Justice Begins with Seeds. because her organization for many years was involved in all these campaigns on leveling of GMOs, to ban GMOs. She has been working over 30 years in issues related to water, environment, food, and she's also an author. Thanks to her book, Foodopoly, I understood perfectly how the corporations have consolidated. All these, the Grocery Manufacturer Association is controlling the whole industrial food system, that 600,000 items that are sold in 600 different brands of commercialized food in grocery stores in the US belong to 6 big companies. I learned a lot with this book, so I really, for many years I tried to bring her to this conference, but she lives in Washington, D.C. It's really hard because we don't have, sometimes we don't have the resources, and sometimes she's very busy because she is the executive director of Food and Water Watch. That is a very big organization, and I am very glad that she's in town in these days, and it was just by chance that I was talking with my friend Adam Sco. I have been working with him for a long time, and he told me, Wenonah Hauter is going to be here, and maybe she will be able to attend the conference. And we have her today, and I am very honored to introduce her to you.
So I'm really glad to be here today. I'm feeling kind of serious, though. I have family members in Florida and feeling really emotional about all of the storms, the fire and fury that we are experiencing all around the world from climate change. So I agree with everything that Starhawk had to say. But I'm going to talk about the political side of the equation and why we need to be politically involved, because this is a political problem. The decisions that have been made that have led to climate change, that have led to a dysfunctional food system, are a result of a political system that is out of control. And of course, we really see that with the Trump administration today, although many of us know that this has been a long road and that many of these problems began decades ago, and that both political parties have shared an ideology that is centered on helping the corporations who fund their campaigns and allow them to have the lifestyle that they do. So about 12 years ago, some of my colleagues and I decided to start Food and Water Watch, and we really thought we were going to focus on food and water issues because these are the issues that hit us in the gut that we must pay attention to continue to live. But alas, about 2008, 2009, we started getting phone calls from our members and supporters saying, you'd better look at fracking. And we did indeed start looking at fracking. And I actually have spent a big chunk of my work life working on energy issues. And when we started looking at what fracking is all about and the destruction of the water resources, the relation to climate change, the earthquakes, and now here in California, they're using fracking wastewater and oil wastewater to irrigate crops, even organic crops down in Kern County. We really began to see the connection between oil and food and water resources, and why we need to make the changes to get off of fossil fuels and to protect our most important resources. And I think it was a real wake-up call to me when I saw that even the evil insurance industry, Lloyd's of London, has written a report called Food Shock that gives a almost 20% chance over the next 40 years that there will be severe storms, the kind of storms that we've been seeing around the globe, including here in the Gulf, that would destroy food crops and would result in a global famine, collapse of the global economic system. And I know that all of you know where we need to go. Starhawk really laid out where we need to go. But unfortunately, our political leaders are incentivizing the wrong kind of technologies. And it's going to do more than us just working at the local level, I believe. Although working at the local level, doing all of these things is critical, but we have to work on many levels to really make the changes that we need to make. And we know who suffers the most from climate change, from a dysfunctional food system, as Skyhawk said. It is those communities of color, it is low-wealth communities, it's immigrants, it's the people that have suffered from our economic system. So we at Food and Water Watch have been trying to think about how we can galvanize and give more people around the country an opportunity to really get involved in getting off fossil fuels. And it's been our feeling, and a lot of the grassroots activists around the country, that we need to stop talking about this being in the future, and we need to talk about getting off of fossil fuels within the next 10 years, certainly all the way off by 2035. And that's just to make sure that we avert the worst of climate change. So we initiated a program that I'd like to invite you or anybody that you know who wants to get involved in the political aspect of this work to look at the website Off Fossil Fuels. We decided to make use of some of those technologies that the Sanders campaign did such a great job with. So the ability to text large numbers of people, which is how they got out those huge crowds during the election, and to create a national team that could support local efforts to get off of fossil fuels, and to give people everywhere the opportunity to be part of a team, even if they live in a place like Oklahoma or Louisiana, where they're not going to be able to make their local official do what they should do at this point in time. And so we launched this a few months ago. We now have a national team that does things like, for instance, there's a very dirty energy bill that would facilitate more natural gas development. Our national team has been calling voter lists that we supply and encouraging, trying to help galvanize people in the target areas to get on the phone and to tell their legislator that they're watching this support for this dirty energy bill. And unfortunately, lots of Democratic senators have supported it, although we've been able to stop it at this point. And this Off Fossil Fuels campaign, we're really trying to lay siege to the fossil fuel industry. Get off of fossil fuels, stop all of the new projects that are being planned around the country, the pipelines, these projects that are so immoral, that are devastating real people's lives, like we saw in North Dakota with the Dakota Access Line. There's a lot of enthusiasm for doing this kind of work, and it really makes a big difference. And with the Off Fossil Fuel campaign, people are getting their local elected officials to sign a pledge to only support policies that result in us getting off of fossil fuels. It can be a local city board, city council person, a county board member, member of Congress, and we want to do this throughout the country. And it's to start the real conversation that we need to be having about climate change, so that while we all know what's going on, we know the connections, there are many, many people who are not informed and who are being propagandized by the right-wing press that dominates this country, things like Fox News, Sinclair Broadcasting, and it's going to be up to us. We can't just work in friendly places in the coastal areas. We need to be working across the country to change these policies. So we have about 130 public officials that have now signed the pledge, and we're really happy that we now have support in the House of Representatives, a real renewables bill that really lays out the kind of program that we should be fighting for, that's not in the future, but that's today. And we're real excited that Tulsi Gabbard, the representative from Hawaii, introduced this bill. We have a number of sponsors, including some of your members of Congress here in California, Ted Lieu, Barbara Lee, Nanette Barbados, a number of people who are really interested in getting this, the discussion going about what we need to do, what kind of program we really need to get off of fossil fuels. And it's our belief that we have to get away from this idea that somehow carbon taxes, cap and trade programs, these things that the financial services industry has really been a part of developing and that benefit from this the most, we need to just say no to fossil fuels. No to fossil fuels. And we need to, as environmentalists, as humanists, as people who work in our communities, we need to not be afraid of doing this. And we really need to change the discussion in the environmental community where there's so much fear about saying what we really need to do. So HR 36, you know, we're not dumb, we're not naive. We know we're not going to pass this legislation this year, next year, the following year. But we need to get this out there, and the only way we can get this discussion out there and really build the political power, the support to do what we need to do, is to have something that lays out what needs to be done. So this bill only uses or allows real renewable energy, not things that are fake, like the fake renewable natural gas that's being promoted in California. I mean, this is an oxymoron. There is an effort to promote renewable natural gas, which is produced from digesters on dairy factory farms and then sold as renewable. Yeah, it's renewable, it's a waste product, and it's going to dig us deeper into the hole that we're already in. So this bill talks about the kind of renewable energy that we should be really relying on: the solar, wind, geothermal, a little bit of hydro. The legislation was drafted with input from the environmental justice community. Very important, because as Starhawk said, we must talk about climate change as being an environmental justice issue. And those communities that are suffering the most need input into the solutions and need to help lead the future and the way that we deal with these problems. So there is a just transition for worker communities who are impacted by losing their jobs, and funding for communities that are low wealth or who are suffering and could not put solar on their roofs or benefit, and who need funding for weatherization, and they need renewable energy jobs. And that money comes from ending the corporate tax breaks on offshore earnings. It's almost $600 billion It ends the subsidies to the oil and gas industry. It requires that by 2025, all automobiles are zero emission, and it goes on and on. Anyway, this gives you kind of a taste of the debate that we're trying to start, and we would love to work with anybody who's interested in participating in this political work. It's going to take all of us together collectively. I believe that we can do this. This isn't about that we're losing, that everything is terrible. So many people have raised their hands since the Trump administration has come into office. It has been a wake-up call. And there is room for every kind of strategy and tactic. And we can work together to achieve these things. And I know that we can protect our future generations by doing this. So I remain really hopeful, and I really look forward to working with all of you in the future.
We have a few minutes for questions. If you have any question, please make them short. Only 5 questions. I'm sorry, the first 5 people who line up are going to be able to make questions because we have to start the breakout. So please make very short questions, very clear, very concise, and so you can allow other people to have questions. To ask.
Hi, my name is Magic. I want to thank both of you for all the work that you're doing and that you're framing this as a time of opportunity for us to bring a vision forward. I'd like to briefly plant a seed. The Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco is owned by the people, and I have a vision of it becoming an art and regeneration center. And we could do this. We could make it a place for education, for our children, for parolees to be trained for new jobs, for all people being trained. All of the people, all of the organizations here could put on demonstrations, just like the Exploratorium used to be, only for regeneration and art. And San Francisco needs this revival. We have stopped it as activists from becoming a police museum or a private hotel in the last 5 years, and we are continuing to fight for a vision of art and regeneration. I would love to work with you. I'm just planting the seed for everyone here. I think it would be a dynamic place. We rose from the ashes like a phoenix after the earthquake with the Palace of Fine Arts and the whole fair. And my new grandson is named Phoenix, so I'm invoking the Phoenix.
Thank you. Greetings to you both. I'm very excited with Wenonah about your idea of beginning to hold corporations responsible for the taxes that they shall now pay for the regeneration of the planet. And you can count me in on that one. Just a very brief history. After the Second World War, corporations paid 97% of taxes. 1976, they paid about 30%. About 5 years ago, they paid about 3%, and now it's almost nothing. So if we're going to continue to have a relationship with these corporations, and if we can turn them, if we can be the trim tab that turns these ships, they can join us and they can pay for it.
Hi, I had a solution of camping parties to reduce vehicle miles traveled. The commuter camp out at private individuals' homes who will host them in exchange for bringing something from a store across the town when they come to visit. And I thought it was they won't have to commute to work and back every day. But right after I made that proposal, I kind of told a lot of people, the city of Fresno turned around and does not allow camping in tents anymore, even on private property. So the homeless people, there's 2,000 homeless people and not enough housing for them all. So now they have to live at less than third world standards, no tent laying out there, a woman laying on the street. In the winter, it gets rained on, it freezes, gets pneumonia, and the cockroaches roll over and come out of the sleeves when she goes to church and falls all over the place at the church. And she couldn't protect herself from cockroaches and mosquitoes and whatever. And why does it have to be less than third world standards? The country's becoming terrible. But what could we do about it?
Hi, my name is Jim Musselman. It's a question for both of you that I have, and I appreciate the idea of regeneration. But Gary Snyder talks about something called the growth monster. Last week I heard Ken Brower talk, and Ken Brower said he's 72. He said in his lifetime the world's population has tripled. I wonder if you feel that dealing with population is something that we need to do to have this regeneration.
Hi there. Thank you both for being here. And Wenonah, I'm really intrigued by this HR 36. I really hope that it succeeds and is able to pass. I actually had a question about this that kind of speaks to what I was presenting on earlier over this weekend. Corporations, like Monsanto, ExxonMobil, they're recognized as equal persons under the 14th Amendment. And there have been several Supreme Court cases over local ordinances that include environmental regulations that were effectively overturned, that overturned local ordinances because they treated large multinational corporations differently than the local companies and violated the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. So I'm just curious to know if there has been consideration in HR 36 towards that court precedent, and if not, how can we make sure that this applies to everyone so that corporations can't claim that right?
I'll start with, it's HR 3671. So the bill does not deal with this local control issue, but I think it's a very important issue, and it's one that activists are working on at the state level. Some states have the ability for a local government to make a decision about zoning in their the boundaries of their county or city, and that has been defended very successfully in some states like New York, for instance. In other states like Missouri, folks have just lost local control. But this is an issue because of the way our Constitution that is written that has to be fought out at the state level, but it's an extremely important issue, and it shows the true hypocrisy of the right wing who likes to say devolution, everything should be decided at the local level, but they don't really mean that. That's just an excuse to not do what they should do at the state or federal level. As far as the population issue goes, I agree. We have a very large population. I think we have to be careful with how we deal with population issues, and probably in the U.S., one of the best ways to fight for women's rights, because we know that women benefit from having birth control and being able to decide how to limit their family. That's a woman's decision. We need to give women the ability to do that. And the reason that we've seen such a spurt of population in so many global South countries is actually because corporations want to bring everybody into the dollar economy, and they want a very large population, and they've been behind, in part, the political move to cut off the kind of birth control programs and other things that women need to make those decisions in their life. And this is not going to go anywhere good unless we are able to fight for those programs and make sure that they're funded, because we know that this is a very, it's a matter of fairness. And, I think the homeless issue, like all of our issues, it's about building the political power to undo these policies and get rid of these bastards that are running our country and elect other people. And a lot of these decisions on how the homeless are treated are made at the local level, or the So it's an issue that can be organized on by people locally, and we all know it's easier to do things locally sometimes than it is to change federal policy.
Thank you. I'll just add a couple things on the population issue. You know, it has been, as Wenonah said, like, it's just been shown by study after study the best way to deal with the population issue is to educate and empower women and girls. And when you do that, then when women have the power to make those choices, they make reasonable choices and you don't get huge bulges of population. Gosh, there were a number of questions. The homeless, yeah. I mean, I think all of those are so bound up in, again, the question of what are our priorities as a society? And we have this really vile right-wing voice constantly pumping into us that somehow anything that actually cares for people or for the earth or for the next generation is somehow a sign of like weakness or, I don't know, coddling people, or it's not like real strength like war and aggression, and it shouldn't be what we're putting our money into. And unfortunately, people have bought into that, and because of that, you know, we have lost a lot of things that we used to take for granted, even things like education and funding. I mean, when my generation, when we went to college in California, I went to UCLA in the 70s, it was free, you know, and it was just understood that state universities should be free to people who lived in that state. And now when you tell young people that, they're like, how could it possibly be free? Like, how could it, you know, how could we afford that? Well, we afforded that because corporations paid taxes, right? Yeah. And they did that, you know, not even out of altruism or anything, but because it was understood that it's to everybody's benefit to educate your population. And we can see that now when we have a really badly educated population voting idiots into office. I'll also say I really like the economic programs that you've put forward. I think they're great things, and I agree that we have to work on all those levels. I like to think about activism as an ecosystem, and it's got all these niches that need to be filled, and, you know, so it's got that niche of working on legislation, and then it's got that niche of organizing big demonstrations, and it's got that niche of direct action. And I think we do better if instead of like telling people like my niche is better than your niche, you know, saying like, oh, how does my niche and your niche, how can they support each other and work together? And when we do that, we can really make some amazing changes. And I wanted to also add into that the idea of divestment, which the Standing Rock campaign against DAPL has done so effectively, of getting people to pull money out of the corporations that are funding the oil and gas and making them bad investments. And I think that is proving to be very effective. And then along with that, putting resources into the things that we need and want, because we need more resources. You know, we need more resources for training the people to do all these regenerative things. We need more resources so that people who don't have a lot of money can afford to be trained in these things. I love the idea of the Palace of Fine Arts as a regenerative center. I think that's beautiful and brilliant. And I'll just also say, one of my friends I just was with in Spain formed a cooperative energy company to get people to invest together and put their money together and they are just about to put their first wind energy project into operation in October and start generating electricity. So we can also think about ways to pool resources and create the things that we need and want.
Thank you so much to both. And you know, this plenary was going to be only women, but at the end, two people canceled. So because I really think that we, as men, we have always to listen to them first. And well, you know, they are not distracted. They are just more focused, smarter. They have more wisdom. They have more bigger heart, you know. And they give us life, you know. Without my mother, I wouldn't be here, you know. So, and I want to thank you for their work, because it's amazing what they both are doing. And every time when I read the book of Foodopoly, I feel very inspired. And when I hear all the comments of my friends about the books of Starhawk, I get very impressed at how many followers she has everywhere. Everywhere I go, they talk about Starhawk, you know. So they both are in different levels, you know. I see in some friends, I see that they talk more about Fracopoly or Foodopoly, and other friends, they are talking about Starhawk. So it's so interesting for me. So thank you so much again. And I want to remind you that we have a lot of squash. Please take it home. And after these breakout presentations, we're going to have a celebration with these bikes that are going to, in the back, that are going to power the music. So please welcome. Thank you again for everything you do. Thank you so much.